Hello, friends. Welcome to another fun-filled edition of Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe, syracuse.com, and if you're watching us live today, we appreciate that. We're on all the Facebook channels today. We're live on Twitter and YouTube as well, or perhaps you're watching sometime in the future as this show does archive on all the channels you're watching now and up on syracuse.com, on YouTube, plenty of places to watch the show down the road later if you can't be with us live. But it's cool to be with us live. Noon Eastern time on Thursdays because you can be a part of the conversation. We will highlight some of your questions, your comments, your opinions, your reaction to what we're talking about today throughout the show. So pop in the comment section. We'll highlight some as we go. Open forum, as always, here on Orange Weekly. I got a few things I'm going to discuss with you guys, but anything you want to talk about, hop in the comments section and we will highlight it. A few things we'll get to today. What an incredible night at the Landmark Theater here in Syracuse, New York last night as we debuted our 2003 Syracuse basketball documentary on the national championship team 20 years later called Will to Win. It was an incredible night at the Landmark. There's great coverage up on syracuse.com today if you want to catch up on that. If you couldn't make it, a lot of you have questions about how you can see the documentary. We'll have information coming on that soon, I believe today. As a matter of fact, that's going to come out if you're watching us here on Thursday. So we will talk about that. We'll talk about a brand new coach on the Syracuse basketball staff. We just learned about this within the hour, as a matter of fact. So we'll have instant reaction to that. Tell you about Brendan Strawn, the new the new assistant coach, that head coach, Adrian Autry, brought in officially today. The reaction to Joe Girard entering the transfer portal. He's talking to a couple of very juicy opportunities for not only for Joe, but what that would mean in terms of a Syracuse connection in the portal, which we will get to. Why this is Dino Baber's most important spring practice and what I think is an unsolvable issue for the Syracuse men's lacrosse team. So let's get into it. Let's start with Will to Win. Folks, I can't lie. I'm beaming with pride today. I am so proud of the people at syracuse.com to put this together. It takes a village to do these things for sure. There's some names in particular that we got to shout out today. And one is our friend Mike Waters. The blood, sweat, and tears that Mike put into this, coordinating interviews, doing the interviews, traveling all over the country to talk to pretty much everybody from that 2003 team. I don't think we missed anybody. And if we did, it's a very short list. I mean, everybody that coached, that played, that was a part of that thing. And that 2003 national championship team was interviewed for this piece, was featured in Will to Win. And Mike did such an incredible job talking to not only the people for the piece, but at the Q&A that happened at the Landmark Theater last night. Krista Lemzak has to be shouted out. And that's not a name many of you probably know because Krista does a lot of behind the scenes work for us. I've worked with Krista on a number of video projects we've done here at syracuse.com. She is a freaking rock star. She's literally an Emmy award-winning producer, and she could win all the awards for this. The way this thing was put together, and I know how much time and effort she put into this, has been incredible. Lauren Long, who is one of our great leaders in video at syracuse.com. Scott Trimble. Again, names you guys probably don't know because they work mostly behind the scenes at syracuse.com, but the efforts they put into this, Scott being one of our main videographers and photographers for this project. Donna DeToda in the work she put in, interviewing people, coordination, our leader, our editor, our guy, Nate Mink, and the time and effort and I can't even tell you what goes into these projects, guys. It's incredible. Our staff that puts on events like this, like our high school sports awards and other things that syracuse.com does, they did an incredible job. Right up to the top, our great leader, Trish Lamont and John Lammers, Tim Kennedy, our president, who, if you saw him last night, if you were at the Landmark Theater. So I know these are maybe some names you don't know, but they're names that need to be recognized. And guys, I don't want to spoil it for you. I mean, Syracuse wins the national championship. Sorry to give away the ending. You will laugh. You will cry. You will be surprised at not only what you see, but in some cases who you see in this documentary. It is incredible. It is Netflix level stuff. It was so well done, and I am so proud of what we are putting out for you, the Syracuse basketball fan, to take in. If you were at the Landmark last night and were a part of the event and saw the Q&A, if you weren't, check out the coverage on syracuse.com today, the photo gallery and the coverage of the most interesting things said at the Q&A. There were stories told in this thing that I didn't know. And I was there. I covered it. I was a part of it. And as many of you, of course, were a part of that and experienced that in 2003. It's hard to believe it's been 20 years, but to see all those guys up there and to hear Josh Pace, who knew Josh Pace, so chatty, one of the quietest guys when he was here at Syracuse, always did the quiet, hard work, I believe Mike Waters said this, the definition of a glue guy when he was at Syracuse, and Queth Dwaney's incredible stories. Of course, Jim Boeheim, who got a standing ovation last night at the Landmark Theater. Jerry McNamara, who told a story of his poor son dislocated his elbow yesterday, or it's 2 days ago now, trying to dunk, right? Trying to, not that Jerry was much of a dunker, right? But trying to follow in the basketball footsteps of dad. So there's all those stories. And man, look, I don't think it's any surprise to say the star of this documentary was the star of that team, Carmelo Anthony. The stories that Melo told, the very colorful remarks that Melo had about a number of things. But it was great to see like the Andrew Cowies of the world and the walk-ons and some of the team managers and behind the scenes footage. That's what makes these things. I'm a big consumer of sports documentaries, as I'm sure many of you are. And it's the stuff you don't know, you don't see, you haven't heard that much about, right? That's what makes these things. And that's what people want to hear and see, and not only be reminded of what they know, but the story behind the block, the story that came afterwards about how Carmelo Anthony, and again, I don't want to give anything away here, but I think most people know this, at the celebration at the Carrier Dome a couple days later, after Syracuse won the national championship, and Melo goes up on that podium and he says, y'all are chanting one more year. I thought you're supposed to stay in college for 4 years. And how right up until pretty much the moment he sat in front of that microphone at a press conference and announced he was going to the NBA, how he wanted to come back to Syracuse, right? And Jim Boeheim basically, Jim said there's more to that story, of course, but how Jim basically said, you can't come back. Like, you got to go to the NBA. What are you doing, right? But the bond that team has, and to hear them, talk about that, and most of them had not seen each other in 20 years. And now twice in the last 3 weeks, because Syracuse did their own celebration of the 03 team at the last home game against Georgia Tech back in early March. And some of those guys hadn't been in the same room. Craig Forth showed up last night and had not seen Jeremy McNeil and Queth Dwaney and Billy Edelin. And, I'm going to leave out some names here. They were all pretty much there. Unfortunately, Melo couldn't make it last night, but it was great to see so many players and hear their stories. And you guys are going to love this. You are going to love it. So keep an eye out on syracuse.com. We're going to put out the details of how you can see Will to Win, the amazing documentary. I apologize for the little self-promotion here to start off the show, but I mean, it's great. And you guys are going to want to see it. And it's an incredible story. And I hope you enjoy it. And I think you will. So great job on everybody's part at syracuse.com. And appreciate everybody that said hello at the Landmark last night. It was great to see so many of our readers and people that had such nice things to say about us and a number of things last night. So thank you. If you were at the Landmark last night and help support what we do at syracuse.com, it's much appreciated, and you will enjoy this. In terms of on the court, we've got some breaking news to discuss here on Orange Weekly. So let me bring up our friend Mike Waters' story here. Give me a moment to do that. As Adrian Autry has filled out his coaching staff, folks, and that opening has gone to George Washington assistant Brendan Strawn. And I believe I'm saying that correctly. Pardon me if I'm not, Coach. His hiring was officially announced today, as Mike writes here, in a release from Syracuse's athletic department, confirming a previous report by Mike and Syracuse.com a little over a week ago. The story with Strawn is, first of all, he's not a Syracuse assistant. And I like the fact that Autry did that. Now, it's funny. Mike Waters, Donna DeToda, and I, we did a video just over a week ago. It's actually like 2 weeks ago now, believe it or not. Just kind of recapping the craziness of the end of the season, Boeheim's retirement, the press conference before that, then, the celebrated press conference, and just what it was like to cover all that. And in the course of talking to Mike and Donna, never make assumptions in this business. And silly me, I made one. I said, boy, if there's one thing you can count on, it's that Autry is going to keep it in the family when he fills the vacant assistant coach role. And both Mike and Donna are sitting there right on screen, shaking their head like this. And I'm like, oh, whoa, hold on a second here. And Autry did go outside the family, if you will. Strawn is a native of New Carrollton, Maryland. We mentioned he coached at George Washington. He has also coached at Loyola, Maryland. He's coached at St. Joseph's, working for Billy Lang there. And he also was a part of Team Takeover from 2013 to 2018. That's an AAU program where, as it's noted here, he developed 70 future Division I players, including 5 McDonald's All-Americans. So, guys, the story with him, who actually recruited Adrian Autry's son, Trey, who wound up committing to George Washington out of schools that included Rhode Island, Nebraska, and Maryland. So what you're doing is you're hitting the DMV area, right? Which is huge. The DC, Virginia, Maryland area. That is a key recruiting demographic for a lot of schools, frankly, but particularly for Syracuse. They've gotten so many key players out of that area, Carmelo Anthony notably, but a number of key players that have come from that area. Strawn knows the AAU circuit. He knows how to find talent, develop talent. He's got a connection with Autry, and Autry is elevating him to Syracuse to come in and bring a broader and a different perspective. You need the guys in the family, but you have that, of course, with Autry, with McNamara, with Griffin. Those are the guys that can tell you what it's like to play at Syracuse, what the expectations are. But look, at the end of the day, it's about finding talent. And Strawn seems to have a strong reputation of finding and developing talent here. And now you're going to put him in an ACC program. You're going to put him with all the resources that Syracuse basketball has. And look, the transfer portal is important. We all know that. And Syracuse got J.J. Starling out of the portal. They'll continue to look into the portal here in the craziness that is college basketball, right? But you still got to recruit, and you still got to bring in freshman talent. Look how many freshmen were on this team this year. It's maybe in hindsight too many, but you still need somebody that can find and develop talent the old-fashioned way, recruit and go that way, right? So Autry seems to have gotten himself a great hire here, and it's been interesting when you've looked on that bench in recent years. All you've seen is Syracuse players sitting next to Jim Boeheim. Now they bring in a fresh voice. Not that it hasn't happened before. Troy Weaver is a great example of that. Speaking of the 2003 team who recruited Carmelo Anthony, amongst other great players, Josh Pace as well, who was just, almost the star of the Q&A last night and had some great comments in Will to Win, the documentary as well. You don't have to have coached or played at Syracuse to know Syracuse. You just got to know talent. The rest of that stuff will fill itself in. So I really think that Autry hit on something here. Tom brings up there's a rumor that he might bring a transfer with him. Any insight there? Tom says he likes the hire regardless. Honestly, Tom, I don't have any insight there. I have heard that as well. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. And, a lot of times these are package deals. Starling comes back to Syracuse. Even when he was at Notre Dame, he maintained contact with Adrian Autry. Autry was his main recruiter for Syracuse, and, keeping those connections in the transfer portal era is huge. I would imagine that would be the case, that he's got a player or two in mind he can bring with him. So we'll keep our eye on that. I don't have anything specific on that, unfortunately, for you. Rob appreciates the hire as well and his desire to put his own stamp on Syracuse basketball. Rob saying the fans, myself included, have started to romanticize the Syracuse family coaching staff, especially during the 08-14 era, where this approach did everything but win a national championship. Yeah, you got to pivot. You got to do something a little different at this point. Just in recent years, look at the recruits that Syracuse has brought in. There's been some wins there. There's been some losses. The transfer portal, as we mentioned, is just such a big thing, but you need a fresh approach, and you need not that Autry doesn't have that connection and these coaches don't have connections in their own way, but Autry trusts this guy. He knows this guy is at the top of his list to come in and elevate and take a bigger step up and he is well tapped into one of the most recruiting-rich areas in the sport. So all well said there, and looks like a great hire for Adrian Autry. Speaking of the transfer portal, Joe Girard is in the portal, and this story broke last Friday that Joe is entering the portal. He's going to test the NBA waters as well. Look, Joe's going to be playing college basketball next year, right? I don't blame him for testing the NBA waters, see what you can get, what kind of feedback, what they're going to tell you, but he's not going to get drafted this year. That's the reality of it. Judah Mintz might not even get drafted, and I think we'll be seeing Judah play back at Syracuse next year. But there's nothing wrong with going into the process, getting straight, direct information from NBA people about where you stand and what you need to work on. So Girard has had a number of schools that he's met with already: Auburn, Stanford, LSU, amongst them. Adam Zagoria reported yesterday that Joe is going to have in-home visits with Mike Hopkins from the University of Washington, who is he's on the hot seat, folks, with the Huskies. Another great interview in Will to Win, by the way. Hopkins was incredible for that. And I know that Mike and Scott and our crew flew to Seattle to talk to him, and it was well worth everything there. So he was terrific. But look, Mike needs some talent. He needs to turn things around. He came back to Washington largely based on the fact that he's got a $6 million buyout in his contract this year, and I don't think Washington wanted to do that. And he's got to turn things around. And if he can bring in Joe, bring in some scoring, somebody that can bring what Joe brings to the table, you can see why Hop is going after that. The other interesting thing is Jeff Capel at Pitt is going to have an in-home visit with Joe Girard. So Joe Girard playing Syracuse next year, you can't help but kind of like, I'm a big Ted Lasso fan, as I'm sure many of you watching are. And now Nate the Great, of course, is a rival, right? It'll feel like that. You know, Nate went villain, not that Joe's the villain, but some people like to paint Joe as the villain. And that's what bothered me about what we saw last week. I certainly understand people have opinions about players, and that's what we do. That's what we talk about on this show and on Twitter and other places, right? But man, some of the reaction was so misguided and so misplaced, and so the vitriol that was out there, and I just don't understand it. And I think a lot of what Joe Girard, air quotes, gets blamed for isn't even his fault, right? And some people, frankly, just got to grow up in how they talk about these players, right? You can certainly have opinions about how they're used, and this is what we do. We're sports fans. We talk Syracuse basketball and Syracuse sports. But man, it's like Joe Girard stepped on your cat or something. The way people were just flat out angry at, and look, social media can be, what's the old line about the Star Wars bar? A wretched hive of scum and villainy, right? But let's look, Joe Girard was brought in here to score. He finishes the 17th leading scorer in Syracuse history. Only two players, Jerry McNamara and Buddy Boeheim, hit more three-pointers than that guy in his career. Okay, and think about if he had come back next year and could have made a run at that record. Joe Girard was often out of position. That's not his fault. He did what was asked of him. He was asked to play the point, played the point, right? The Joe Girard-Kadari Richmond debate that sparked a couple of years ago, which, honestly, I felt like should have went in favor of Kadari Richmond. Not going to lie, right? I wrote that. I stand by that. But that's not Joe's fault. That's a Jim Boeheim decision. So I think a lot of the angst that people have for Joe is actually angst for Jim Boeheim and the coaching staff that they put on him. Now, look, Joe is a flawed player defensively. There was no question about that. I'm not going to sit here and defend that. Every player's got flaws, but it's not like he was sold as that. Joe was out there to shoot. He was out there to score. He was out there to put threes in, and he was out there to do what was asked of him. And that's all he did for 4 years. Okay, that kid busted his butt. He finished with 16 points per game last year in the ACC. Okay, you do that. You know how hard that is to do? So I think some of that frustration was misplaced. And I don't know why Joe is so polarizing. I see it right here from Joe, the no D, Joe G3. Joe, whatever. That's not what the kid was there to do. And he was there to score and shoot threes. and have other roles on this team. And look, it certainly, how could I put this? That's not ideal at the top of the zone. That's why I wanted to see Kadari Richmond a couple of years ago. He was a better defender and he was a better option at the top of the zone. But Joe Girard had a role on this team. And I think ultimately the contributions that Girard made to this team should be appreciated, right? And should not be looked at with the scorn that some people put on that. And see, Michael Antonio, I think, hits on it here. He was misused by Boeheim. If you want to be frustrated with that, fair game. I think that's where the criticism should go if you feel he was misused as a player. But that's not Joe's fault, right? Joe's out there to do what he was asked to do, and that's all he did for 4 years. So, look, I enjoyed talking to him. I enjoyed covering him. I think he's a great kid. His story is so unique. And think about this. What if Syracuse didn't land Girard, right? New York State's all-time leading scorer, averaging nearly 50 points per game. We've all heard the stories of the legend that he created in Glens Falls. If they didn't get that kid, the pitchforks would have been sharpened and the torches would have had right for the Mello Center, right? It's kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. But that was a player that Jim Boeheim absolutely had to land for a number of reasons, and they did. They got him, right? I think some of the angst that is pointed at Girard's way is just an overall frustration of how things have gone this year. How much you can blame him for that, I think is minimal. I think it's minimal. I think there's fair criticisms of his game, but I think even for social media, even for the era we're in today, some of the criticisms that were out there, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, as we all are, myself included, but it was just beyond the line. And I think wrong, and I think ridiculous, and I think he deserved better than that. So that being said, man, what if he ends up at Pitt? Or a team that plays Syracuse next year? And look, I don't root for your team, but I root for a good story, and that'd be a hell of a story, right? So we'll see where Joe ends up, but wherever it is, I can say I wish him the best of luck and get one more year out of college basketball, go kick some butt, and then see what happens after that. I would believe coaching's in his future, some kind of role in basketball is in his future, and really enjoyed having Joe here and covering him and talking to him and watching him play, frankly, right? Did he take too many logo shots? Yeah. Was he somebody whose defense needed work? Of course, right? He's not without flaws. But I think I'll remember Joe Girard more fondly than the other way here. So I just wanted to address that. I think sometimes people just have misplaced frustrations with people. And I feel like most of that should have been pointed at the coaching staff and not at a kid that just did what he was asked to do. Right, wrong, or indifferent, right? Okay, so that's basketball. Let's switch gears to football. This is the most important spring practice that Dino Babers has had. And some of those reasons are obvious, right? This is a team that, barely got over the finish line last year after starting 6-0 to a bowl game, right? So that's obvious. Dino, I wouldn't say is on the hot seat traditionally in that sense, but the pressure's there, right? To build on that, to maintain that, to have a winning season again, to get back to a bowl game again, right? I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background. He agrees with all of this. He has many hot takes on Syracuse football, right? So that's why this spring practice is important. But let me give you a couple other reasons why. One, a lot of new faces in spring ball. Emily Leiker wrote a great piece the other day. She was at practice, and Dino just, how can I put this? As a coach, you're always kind of dropping the hammer. You're setting the tone, right? You're doing what football coaches do. But he had enough of a particular drill. Now, this was the first day in pads a couple days ago, and we'll get to the quarterback situation in a moment here. But the defense was just kicking the offense's butt. There was like 3 safeties, and the offense was a mess. And Dino said, enough of this bleep. Called over Jason Beck, the offensive coordinator, and the coaches, and in full view, probably on purpose, frankly, of, when the media is there or when they're not, and what kind of message you want to send, right? And I just want to highlight a few more of your comments as we go here. He's setting a tone here. He's got 5 new coaches. He's got a lot of transfers, particularly at the cornerback position that Syracuse has to integrate here. And I think Dino's been a little bit more vocal, a little shorter fuse, and is trying to kind of say, like, the things you got to get done in spring ball. Guys, when you go to fall ball, look, it's go time. There's not a lot of room for working on technicalities and verbiage and the things that just have to be second nature to you to get ready for a season and get ready for that first game. And look, Syracuse opens with Colgate this year. That should not be too much of a challenge as opposed to last year when they came out of the gate against Louisville and things had to be sharp, sharp, sharp. But last year you had everybody there, the same staff. Things were streamlined. There was no quarterback competition at camp like there was the previous year between Schrader and DeVito. This year, there's a lot of new faces that have to streamline, coaches and players. Plus, guys, the backup quarterback plays at Syracuse. Flat out. Either by injury or coach's choice. And what you have is a spring practice where Justin Lamson and Carlos Del Rio Wilson are getting extended reps, obviously with the injury to Garrett Schrader. Schrader, by the way, is out of he had a brace on his elbow, as I demonstrate for you here. It almost looked like kind of like, for lack of a better term, it was like a robotic thing that he had on. Now he's down to a brace that kind of slips on. So he's making progressions. He's not going to be able to throw or anything for a while here. And Schrader's had a presence at practice. He's been there. He's been vocal. He's right there, but obviously he can't play for a while here. Lamson had a terrific spring game last year, and I'm as curious as anybody what his spring game is going to look like this year. We're still a few weeks away from that, by the way, guys. April 21st is the spring game this year. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, loved the talent, loved the mobility. He's got swagger. We talked to him the other day, first time we've had a chance to talk to him in spring practice. He's got a lot of confidence. The issue with Carlos is he overthrows too many receivers, and that's another important thing with spring practice is the timing with the receivers for these quarterbacks. They've got to get it down because they're going to play. Inevitably, it's happened every year for the last decade that a backup quarterback at Syracuse will start a game, multiple games, will have to come in for injury. It's just the sport. So I think Dino has to take full advantage of every minute of spring practice to try and get back to what fall ball was last year. It was sharp. It was quick. It was efficient because everybody was on the same page. It was go time. And I think that's what really helped them beat Louisville and come out of the gate and establish 6-0 because the schedule's the same this year, guys. They've got to bank as many wins as they possibly can early, then hold on for dear life. I mean, that portion of the schedule that they have, let me pull it up while we're yapping about it here, just to give you a sense of what they're facing here and why, with so much more transition on this team, they've got to be as streamlined as they possibly can here. So this is just to give you a reminder of what the schedule looks like this upcoming season for football. They start at the Dome, and they've got a lot of home games, again, earlier this year. They start at the Dome against Colgate on September 2nd, host Western Michigan on the 9th. They actually go to Purdue on September 16th. Aiden O'Connell no longer there, but that's not going to be an easy game by any stretch. They host Army. Then you get Clemson, North Carolina with Drake May and company back, Florida State with Jordan Travis, who might end up being the preseason Heisman Trophy favorite at this rate. Thursday night game at Virginia Tech. And onward we go. But that stretch, Clemson, Carolina, Florida State, at Tech, BC won't be an easy game. That's a Friday night game. Pitt, I mean, you're right into the fire there. So they've got to be streamlined in this thing. We'll keep an eye on things in spring practice. Emily's been doing a great job tracking some things. And we still got a few more weeks of spring practice before the spring game, which is on April 21st. And as Michael Antonio notes, they've got to keep injuries to a minimum. And interesting on that note, Michael Antonio, so Syracuse has hired a full-time nutritionist. A lot of the players have raved about Miss Tori, as they call her, and that's a needed thing. And not only nutritionists, but the focus on soft tissue injuries, how they're monitoring that, and how they're trying to cut back on that. Now, a number of programs in Syracuse have done this. They've got GPS trackers and they're doing everything they can technology-wise. The lacrosse teams are doing this. The soccer team did this. I think everybody's pretty much in the pool in some way. And you use technology as best as you can to your advantage to try and cut back on these injuries. Some of them are unavoidable, particularly in football with the physical nature of the game. But you're not wrong to say that depth does not go, pun intended here, as deep as it needs to in some cases. Hence how important this spring practice is with the backup quarterbacks getting the extended time that they need at this point. All right, that's football. Before we wrap up here, a couple of lacrosse thoughts. Syracuse is going into it now. After a 3-game stretch against teams that Syracuse should have beat and did, Hobart, St. Bonaventure, Hofstra, to go back. It gets real for Gary Gate, Gary Gate and company again here, as you get Notre Dame coming in on Saturday. And then, look, everybody left on the schedule, Princeton, North Carolina, Duke, all ranked. All 4 of the 5 are top 10 teams in the RPI. Princeton's 23rd in the RPI. Gary Gate, after the Hobart game, put it this way: we need to go hunting for upsets. If Syracuse is going to do that, they've got to do a couple of things. One, the offense has to maintain the torrid pace they've been on, right? They're 10th, top 10 in the country in goals per game. Joey Spallina has just been just a superstar so far. The spark that players like Finn Thompson have brought to the offense, Owen Hiltz being back, the offense has not been the issue with this team, right? Defense, I think, has had too much pressure put on it by the lack of face-offs for this team. But I think the defense, when you look at how they did against the ranked teams that Syracuse played earlier this season, Maryland, Hopkins, Duke the first time around in what was an overtime game, and North Carolina, versus the improvement they've got to make down the stretch here. I think there's a lot of pressure on them. But guys, I don't think the face-off issue is going to be solved. You've got Johnny Rachuza, you've got Fine, whoever is the hot hand gets in there, but the pressure that this puts on the defense is too much. And, you know, a few of you reached out to me. I wrote a column about this. It's out on syracuse.com and in the Post-Standard newspaper today. And I put the focus on the defense, and I didn't mention the face-offs in that story because this was a story focused on the defense. But fair to point out, as a number of you did, face-offs affect the defense. When the defense has too much pressure and has to play too much, they're going to get winded. They're going to get fatigued, and mistakes are going to be made. Now, they lost to Duke in overtime. They lost to Hopkins by a couple of goals. Maryland by 3 goals. The only team that had any sort of extended win over Syracuse was North Carolina at 19-13 in terms of the ranked teams that they played. But they're not going to solve the face-off issue. I think it is what it is. And Gary Gate gets really frustrated when people talk about it and ask about it. And Gary's always cool about it, right? But Gary gets frustrated in the sense of he basically is honest and says, there's nothing we can do about it. We're working on it every day. We've got 2 guys that do it. That's why I put a little bit more of the onus on the defense, because I think there's more they can do. You know, Linda brings it up here. Sam Alexo has been moved on the defense. Nick Kikamo has been moved on the defense. Brandon Avilas has been somebody that has been a real boost for this team since coming back from injury. Will Mark has been a godsend in net, but he can only do so much in net when he's facing too many shots. When you look at the disparity, and I put this in my column if you guys want to check it out, but the disparity in the shots that they face against those ranked teams versus, you know, the Bonaventures, Hofstras, and Hobarts of the world, and that's kind of obvious, just the talent gap that's there. You're putting too much pressure on your goalie. And Will Mark, I think, has, man, I just think of a guy that's like holding the wall behind him from just collapsing and doing everything he can personally to do that. Syracuse did not have consistent goaltending last year. They have great goaltending this year, but if this team is going to go hunting for upsets and is going to pull off some of these upsets, I put that more on the defense than faceoffs, because I don't think faceoffs are a solvable issue right now. Defense, I think there are some things they can do. They just have to convert on a few more plays, cut back in those close situations. Mark, as great as he's been, right? I don't want to say he's got to step up, because that wouldn't be fair. But in some of these games, it's been one or two saves. It's been one or two possessions that have to go the other way, that have to be executed. And I feel like the defense can do more of that. Face-offs, anything they get at this point, frankly, is just going to be gravy. It's just going to be a bonus, because they have not established to this point, and I don't see that improving against better teams, that they can really cut into the face-off issue. They'll make adjustments. They'll do what they can. You put more emphasis on ground balls and try and work around the problem as best as you can. You know, the old expression, you exploit your strengths, you hide your weaknesses. Face-offs is a hard one to hide, right? So I'm as curious as anybody how they do. And if they can, look, the opportunity's there. If Syracuse has an RPI of 31 right now, the NCAA selection committee traditionally has leaned on RPI, which that's an entirely different conversation about how outdated that is, but that's what they do. Syracuse is an RPI of 31. 4 of their next 5 opponents are top 10 RPI teams. They're all ranked teams. You win 3 of those 5 games, you're in the NCAA tournament conversation. And if Gary Gait gets this team to the NCAA tournament, that's a hell of an accomplishment on its own right there. So only one home game left. It is Saturday at the Dome, senior day, both for the men's and the women's lacrosse teams, by the way. They had their senior day coming up. The women are going to face number 11, Virginia, coming up. Women's lacrosse, undefeated, 12-0, off to the best start in the history. There you go, Jamie. That's what we're doing right now, because they are fire, and they're national championship contenders. And little tease, Uncle Brent's got a story coming out about this in a few hours. Women's lacrosse team was at the Will to Win documentary last night. And part of the reason they went to that documentary last night was to take whatever lessons they can from a championship team. Cool moment last night at the Q&A afterwards. Jerry McNamara knew they were there, called them out, and said, you know, as a matter of fact, let me, I have the quotes right here. Let me, just give me a sec to, did I close that out? Oh boy. I thought I had it open on my screen here, guys, but it looks like I don't. So you're just going to have to read the story to see what's going on there. But Jerry specifically spoke to the women's lacrosse team last night. It was a great moment, and he kind of described to them what it's like to win a championship, and they're right on the cusp of it. How about that behind the back shot from Emma Tyrell the other day? Megan Tyrell is now the 4th leading scorer in Syracuse lacrosse history. She's been, everything we expected. Emma Ward and the connection she has with Megan Carney has been fantastic. Delaney Schweitzer continues to lock down the net. It's a great team. It's a great team that I think Virginia can challenge, but I don't think will win. And it's all pointing towards that April 15th matchup between Syracuse and North Carolina, right? That'll be the true litmus test of Syracuse's national championship aspirations. It won't be the last time they see them. I'm certain they'll meet again in the ACC tournament and probably in the Final Four as well. But as Jamie put it, they are fire. They are great. And they are the second true blue national championship contender that Syracuse has this year, of course, with the men's soccer team winning a championship just a few months ago. So the men's team is a 2:00 face-off at the Dome. The women's team will follow just a few hours later with a 6:00 face-off at the Dome on Saturday. And onward we go, ladies and gentlemen. Any update on women's number 22 from Linda? You mean Megan Carney? I mean, Megan Carney's been great. She's been one of the best players in the country. She's scoring goals at a frantic pace, and she's got she's got the leg wrap that she wears. She is fighting through a little bit of an injury at this point, just kind of gutting through it right now, and she's just been spectacular. She's knock on wood. That's been one of the keys with this team is they have stayed healthy. They had a number of injuries last year. I mean, they lost a couple players, unfortunately, this year. They lost their main draw control player in Kate Mashevsky, but Olivia Adamson has stepped right in to that role and looks like she's kind of stopped the bleeding there, if you will. Abigail Lagos from earlier this year, a couple other players that are just kind of fighting through the normal bumps and bruises, but they've stayed healthy and they've got almost more firepower than anybody in the country. Great defense, great goaltending, the balance, obviously a great coach and Kayla Trainer. So it's been fun to watch and make some plans for Memorial Day weekend, folks, because I think they're going to be there. All right, what do you say we end Orange Weekly on that note? Great stuff from you guys. Appreciate your comments and watching and being a part of the show as always. That's what's cool about being a part of Orange Weekly Live. But just a reminder that this show archives automatically on all the channels you're watching now. We put up a post on syracuse.com. Follow our Syracuse Orange Sports on syracuse.com YouTube page so you can always get the replay of this show on demand whenever you want. In the meantime, keep reading syracuse.com. Lots of great stuff coming, folks. The details included on how you can check out Will to Win, our documentary on the 2003 Syracuse Basketball National Championship team. Enjoy the rest of your week. Spring has sprung, allegedly. We had a little snow squall come through yesterday after it was 60 degrees here in Syracuse, so we're still kind of crawling our way to spring, but hope having a great spring so far wherever you're watching today. We'll catch you next time here on Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. Thanks for hanging out with us today, guys.